Jedediah Stone swung the axe again, the flat thud of the polehammer echoing across the frozen river. It was a dead sound, swallowed instantly by the vast, high-altitude silence of the Green River Valley. The year was 1841, and the cold was not just a sensation. It was an opponent. It pressed against his buffalo hide coat, found the gap between his mittens and his sleeve, and sank needles into his wrists. His breath plumed in the crystalline air, freezing instantly to the wool scarf wrapped tight across his face, a mask of ice that crackled when he moved his jaw. Around him, the Wyoming wilderness was a study in white and gray-blue, the sky a polished, empty steel disk. The sun, weak and low in the south, offered light but no warmth. It was, he guessed, 40 degrees below zero. At such temperatures, metal became brittle, and a man's own sweat could kill him. He was not sweating. He was just cold, a deep, pervasive cold that lived in his bones and made his thoughts slow. His target was a small, ragged hole in the ice, a wound he had to reopen every single morning. The river ice was over 3 feet thick, a layered, milky barrier between him and the water he needed to live. Every chop of his axe sent a painful jolt up his arms, the vibration stinging his already numb hands. The handle was slick, and his grip was failing. This task, this simple daily requirement of gathering water, had become the central misery of his winter. He was a trapper, a man who prided himself on self-reliance, on his ability to read the land and thrive where others failed. But this felt like failure. It was inefficient, dangerous, and exhausting. He glanced back at his cabin, a dark smudge of logs tucked into the timberline a quarter-mile away. Smoke rose from the mud and stick chimney, a thin vertical line against the towering wall of the Wind River Mountains. That smoke represented another failure. The constant, ravenous hunger of his fireplace, which devoured the wood he'd spent all fall cutting, just to keep the cabin bearably cold. And the water he was fighting for wasn't even good. When he finally, after an hour of shattering impacts, broke through the last layer, the hole filled with a dark, sluggish water that tasted of mud and dead vegetation. It was bottom water, and he knew it. It was the only water he could get, but it was silty, flat, and carried a faint, fishy odor that clung to his tea and his stew. He hated it. He hated the chore. He hated the vulnerability. As he knelt, his knees cracking, to dip his frozen wooden bucket into the black opening, a new sharp sound split the air. Crack. It wasn't his axe. It was the river itself. The ice sheet was settling, shifting under the immense pressure of the cold. He froze, listening. The sound was close. Too close. He was balanced precariously on the edge of the hole he'd just made, a weak point. He understood, with a sudden, sickening clarity, that a slip, a moment of imbalance, would mean he'd be under the ice. He would be swept away in the dark, his heavy coat pulling him down, and he would die, his fingers scraping the underside of the frozen ceiling he had just fought so hard to breach. He stood up slowly, his heart hammering a painful rhythm against his ribs. He left the bucket half full. He backed away, axe in hand, his eyes fixed on the hole as if it were a predator. This was wrong. This whole system was wrong. It wasn't just hard. It was stupid. It was a daily invitation to disaster. There had to be a better way to get water in a world made of it. That first winter he had nearly died, not from the cold, but from his own ignorance. He had arrived in the high valley in late summer, full of the confidence of a man who had mastered the milder climates of the Ohio Valley. He built his cabin as he'd been taught, tight-scribed logs, a heavy stone fireplace, and a roof of split shakes. It was a good, solid structure, but it was a structure built for a different world. He hadn't understood the pressure of a high-country winter. He hadn't understood how the cold could find its way through solid wood, how the wind, a relentless, scouring force, could drive fine, sugary snow through the tiniest flaw in his chinking. His first attempt at solving the water problem had been melting snow. It seemed obvious. The world was buried in it. He would spend hours gathering buckets of the light, fluffy powder, hauling it inside, and packing it into his big iron kettle. The failure was immediate and profound. First, the snow was mostly air. It took a 10-gallon kettle packed tight with snow to produce a single gallon of water. Second, the process was disastrous for his cabin. The moment the kettle heated, it released clouds of steam. The steam rose, hit the freezing cold roof planks, and condensed, freezing instantly into a layer of interior frost. By nightfall, his blankets, his clothes, his sacks of flour, everything was coated in a fine, damp rime that never, ever dried. The cabin became a damp, cold cave. Worse, the snow, unless he added a seed of water first, would scorch against the bottom of the pot, creating a foul, burnt taste that permeated everything. And the water it produced, even when it didn't taste of smoke and scorched iron, was empty. It was flat, lifeless, and vaguely smoky from the fire. It didn't quench his thirst. It felt thin and wrong. So he abandoned the snow melting, deciding the lung dampness and the wasted fuel weren't worth it. That was when he turned to the river, and to the axe. He built like everyone else, he gathered water like everyone else, and he suffered like everyone else. He was exhausted, constantly dehydrated, and by mid-January, he was sick. The silty bottom of the river water had given him beaver fever, a deep, grinding sickness in his gut that left him weak, feverish, and miserable for weeks. He'd lie in his bunk, shivering even by the fire, looking at the ice-coated walls of his cabin, and feel a deep, creeping desperation. The standard methods were failing him. The common wisdom was built for a world that wasn't this one. This world demanded something different. This land didn't forgive mistakes, and it didn't reward wasted effort. He realized that the axe, his primary tool of survival, was the wrong tool for this job. He was fighting the ice, trying to defeat it every day. He was wasting energy, risking his life, and drinking poison for his troubles. The thought lodged in his mind and wouldn't leave. You don't fight the ice. You don't fight the cold. You had to find a way to use it. But how? In the late spring, as the river ice was breaking up into great, grinding artillery, a man came down from the high passes. He was impossibly old, his face a map of sun-scorched wrinkles, his eyes the color of the washed-out sky. His name was Silas Reed, one of the last of the free trappers from the 1820s. A man who had lived so long in the mountains he seemed more a part of them than the rocks. He carried a long Hawken rifle and led a single-pack mule. He stopped at Jed's cabin, not for shelter, but for trade. Jed had pelts, and Silas had a small amount of powder and lead he'd hauled from some distant, forgotten rendezvous. They sat by Jed's fire, the cabin door open to the first mild breeze of May. Jed, still gaunt from his winter sickness, found himself complaining. He spoke of the endless cold, the dampness, and the misery of the daily water chore. He described the back-breaking work of the axe, the dark, foul-tasting water, and the sickness that followed. Silas listened, saying nothing, his eyes half closed as he smoked his pipe. He let the silence stretch out after Jed had finished, a long, comfortable quiet. Finally, he tapped his pipe on the stone hearth. "You're drinking the bottom," Silas said, his voice a dry rasp. "Ain't you?" Jed nodded. "It's the only water there is. The rest is ice." Silas let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like sticks breaking. "Boy," he said, "the ice is the water. You're chopping through. The good part to get to the filth." Jed frowned, not understanding. "It's frozen. It's—" Silas leaned forward, his expression suddenly sharp, the eyes no longer sleepy. "What's in the river, son? Silt, dead leaves, fish sign, all the muck of the valley. That's what's in the water. That's what's making you gut-sick." He pointed the stem of his pipe at the floor. "Now, what happens when the freeze comes?" Jed shrugged. "It freezes." "The river cleans itself," Silas said, his voice dropping. "It pushes the sickness down. As that water turns to ice, from the top down, it spits out the dirt. It don't want it. The ice. The clear ice. That ain't just water. That's the cleanest water you'll ever find. It's cleaner than a spring. You've been busting your back to get past the prize so you can drink the slop." Jed's mind turned the idea over. It felt like a trick. "But it's hard as stone. How do you get it? How do you use it?" "You don't use an axe," Silas said, standing up, his visit clearly over. "An axe is for splittin'. It shatters what you want. You use a chisel. You quarry it. Like stone. You take the black ice, not the white milky snow ice on top. You take the clear black glass from the middle. You bring it home, and you let it give you the water." He walked to the door and looked back at Jed. "Stop fighting the winter, boy. It's bigger than you. Learn to use it. The freeze ain't your enemy. The freeze is your filter." Silas Reed left the next morning, heading north into lands Jed had only heard of. But his words remained, echoing in the cabin. The freeze is your filter. Jed Stone spent the entire summer and fall not just preparing for the next winter, but planning a complete revolution in his daily life. Jedediah Stone, armed with this single transformative idea, began to think like an engineer. The problem was no longer how to get water, but how to harvest and process ice. He needed a system. He broke the problem down into parts: harvesting, transport, and melting. Harvesting came first. Silas was right. His axe was a brute force tool, clumsy and wasteful. It was designed for felling trees, not for carving precise blocks from a sheet of 3-foot thick ice. He needed a dedicated tool. He had a small, rough forge near his woodpile, made of river stones and clay, with a bellows he'd crafted from a deer's hide. He took a long, heavy-duty file he'd brought from the east, a tool he rarely used. He heated it in the glowing charcoal, the metal turning from black to cherry red, then to a bright, pulsing orange. He hammered it on his anvil, a flat, massive boulder, drawing the metal out, flattening and lengthening it, giving it a wide, sharp, chisel-like edge. He worked for 2 days, hammering, reheating, and shaping. Then, the most critical part, the tempering. He heated it one last time to a precise, dull red, and quenched it in the animal fat tallow he kept for his leather. A hiss, a plume of stinking smoke, and the steel was hardened. He sharpened the edge on his whetstone until it was razor-sharp, then mounted it onto a stout 6-foot hickory handle. He now possessed an ice chisel. Next was transport. He knew from heaving logs that ice would be impossibly heavy. He couldn't carry it a quarter mile. He had to haul it. He built a small sled, a stone boat. Really, not with runners that could break or stick, but with 2 wide, smooth planks of aspen curved up at the front. It was low, stable, and designed for one purpose: to carry a single, heavy block of ice from the river to his door. Finally, the most important part: the melting. He would not, ever again, melt snow or ice inside his cabin. The dampness and the wasted fuel were problems he was now finished with. He needed a passive system. He found a spot just outside his cabin door, sheltered from the north wind by the corner of the house and bathed in the weak, southern-facing sun. He spent a week building what he called his melting table. He laid a foundation of heavy, flat rocks, creating a stable platform that was slightly tilted. On top of this, he placed the masterwork, a single, massive 10-foot log of cottonwood that he had carefully hollowed out, splitting it and carving it with his adze to create a long, shallow trough. He angled this trough so that any liquid placed in it would run down to one end. At that low end, he carved a small, neat spout. He built a small wooden roof for the trough, a few planks to keep the falling snow off the ice he would place there. His system was complete. He had a tool to cut, a sled to haul, and a table to melt. He spent the remaining days of fall obsessed with the details, checking the angle of the trough, clearing the path from the river, and practicing the swing of his new chisel on a fallen log. He wasn't just waiting for winter. He was planning for it. He felt a focused, quiet confidence he hadn't known the year before. He wasn't dreading the freeze. He was waiting for his filter to arrive. When the first true, deep cold of November locked the river in its grip, Jedediah Stone did not grab his axe. He grabbed his new ice chisel and his sled and walked to the river. The ice was over a foot thick, and he walked out onto its surface with a new purpose. He found his spot, a wide, stable bend, away from the main current, where the ice had frozen clear and deep. He began. First, he used his axe to clear the top layer of white, air-filled snow ice. It was brittle and useless, just as Silas had said. He cleared a large, 10 by 10 foot patch until he exposed what lay beneath. The black ice. It was stunning. It was a sheet of pure, dark glass, so clear he could see the silt-covered rocks on the riverbed feet below, distorted as if through a lens. This was his prize. He took his chisel, braced it with both hands, and thudded it into the black ice. The sound was different from the axe. Not a crack, but a deep, resonant thka. A clean, wedge-shaped chip flew out. He began to cut a line. Thka, thka, thka. The rhythm of a mason, not a woodcutter. He was scoring the ice, cutting a deep, straight groove. He cut a large rectangle, about 3 feet by 2 feet. This was slow, methodical work. It was harder than swinging the axe, but it was focused. He wasn't fighting, he was carving. After scoring all 4 sides, he returned to the first line and began to drive the chisel in deeper, pounding it down, breaking through the thickness of the ice block. Finally, with a deep, groaning snap, the block broke free from the surrounding sheet. It floated, heavy and dark, in the channel he had made. Now came the heaviest part. He used the chisel as a lever, prying the massive block up and out of the water. The suck of the water releasing it was immense. The block was slick, unbelievably dense, and weighed well over 100 pounds. He wrestled it out of the hole, the freezing water splashing his leggings, where it instantly froze solid. He heaved the block onto his small sled, lashed it down with a rope, and began the long, agonizing pull back to the cabin. The sled runners groaned, but they held. He was panting, his muscles burning by the time he reached his melting table. With the last of his strength, he and the chisel levered the massive, glass-like block onto the high end of the hollowed log trough. He placed his clean wooden water bucket under the spout at the other end. And then, he waited. He went inside, built his fire, and did not, for the first time in a year, look at his indoor water barrel with dread. The test of his new system was not a blizzard or a storm. It was quiet. It was the simple, slow magic of physics. As the weak midday sun struck the black ice, and as the ambient air, even though it was brutally cold, began to work on the block, a tiny, slow transformation began. The block, which had been dry, developed a slick, wet sheen. A single drop of water formed on its underside, clung there for a moment, and then rolled down the shallow, angled groove of the log. It traveled the 10-foot length, reached the spout, and fell with a single, clear plink into the bucket below. Plink. A minute later, another. Plink. Jedediah sat on his stool by the door, watching. This was the sound of his victory. It was the slowest, most beautiful sound he had ever heard. All day the block wept its clean water. Drip, drip, drip. It was a passive, automatic process that required no fuel, no steam, no smoke. Just patience. By evening, the massive block was visibly smaller, and his 10-gallon bucket was nearly half full. He brought the bucket inside. The first test was sight. He held it up to the firelight. The water was perfectly, astonishingly clear. There was no silt. There was no floating life. It was as clean as if it had been poured from a bottle. He heated a dipperful in his kettle, not to a rolling boil, just enough to take the chill off. He was still wary, his gut remembering the sickness. He took a sip. And he froze. It was sweet. It was clean. It tasted of nothing. Not of mud, not of fish, not of smoke, not of scorched iron. It was the pure, essential taste of water itself. He drank the entire dipper, then another, and another. It was the first time in over a year he had quenched his thirst, truly and deeply. He had done it. He had taken the most hostile element of his world, the ice, and turned it into his sustenance. The validation came not in hours, but in weeks. He continued his new ritual. Every 3 days, he would haul another block. The 1 hour of hard, methodical labor gave him 3 days of perfect water. The dampness in his cabin vanished. The layer of frost on the walls receded. And most importantly, the sickness in his gut faded. He felt a return of strength, a sharpness of mind, an energy he thought the high altitude had stolen from him. He was no longer just surviving the winter. He was thriving in it. His system worked. The ice was, indeed, a filter. That winter, a young trapper named Finn O'Malley, new to the valley and half-starved, stumbled to Jed's door during a whiteout. Jed brought him in, sat him by the fire, and gave him a stew. Finn was gaunt, his face pale and drawn. He complained of the river flux and the unending misery of the cold. He eyed Jed's full water barrel. "How do you keep it from freezin' in here?" Finn asked, his voice weak. "Must burn a cord of wood a day just meltin' snow." Jed shook his head. "I don't melt snow, and I don't drink from the river." He took Finn outside. The storm had subsided, and in the blue twilight, Finn saw the strange contraption. The massive, shrinking block of ice sitting in its log trough, the bucket below it slowly filling. Finn stared, uncomprehending. "You're farming ice?" he asked, skeptical. "Why not just chop a hole? It's faster." "Faster to what?" Jed said. "Faster to the sickness? Faster to the bottom?" He handed Finn a dipper of the water from the harvest bucket. Finn, dehydrated, drank it greedily. He stopped mid-swallow, his eyes widening just as Jed's had. He looked at the dipper, then at the ice, then at Jed. "There's no mud," he whispered. "It's sweet." Jed nodded, and he explained the principle Silas had taught him. The freeze pushes the silt down. You just take the clean part. The river cleans itself. Finn O'Malley stayed for a week. He helped Jed haul ice, and Jed helped him build his own ice chisel from an old trap spring. When Finn left, he was a healthier, stronger man. He took the idea with him. The next year, settlers began to arrive, pushing west, and they built their cabins along the Green River, bringing their lowland habits with them. And that first winter, they started to get sick. But Finn O'Malley and Jed Stone taught them. They showed them the trapper's secret. They taught them how to read the ice, to chip away the white snow ice, and to harvest the black ice below. The small angled melting tables became a common, curious sight next to the new cabins. The idea spread, passed from one desperate family to the next. It became in that valley the standard way. The knowledge saved children. It saved livestock. It transformed the simple act of winter survival from a game of chance against dysentery into a reliable, manageable process. The ice harvest became a piece of vernacular wisdom, a fundamental technology of the high country frontier, its origins in one man's desperation and another's observation fading, as all good ideas do, into the realm of simple common sense. What Jedediah Stone and Silas Reed had intuitively understood was a powerful principle of chemistry and physics: fractional crystallization. Water, as a solvent, is a messy, chaotic mix of H2O molecules and countless other things: minerals, silt, organic matter, and the gut sickness, bacteria and protozoa. But when water freezes, it attempts to become a pure, ordered crystal. The H2O molecules lock together in a tight, repeating lattice. This lattice structure has no room for the impurities, the solutes. As the ice crystals form, they actively reject these foreign particles. The silt, the salts, the bacteria, they are all pushed away from the growing ice sheet, concentrated into the remaining unfrozen water below. This is why the bottom water that Jed first drank was so foul. It was a concentrated brine of all the valley's filth, pushed down by the pure, freezing filter above it. Jed's system was a model of engineering efficiency, born from necessity. By clearing the snow ice, which was just frozen snow, full of trapped air and dust, he exposed the black ice. This was the structural ice, the pure ice, the crystal lattice that had spent months rejecting impurities. He was harvesting a purified natural resource. His melting system was equally brilliant. By placing the block outside, he used the ambient energy of the air and the radiant energy of the sun to do the work. This was a passive system. It required no firewood. He wasn't burning his hard-won fuel to make water. He was letting the environment do the work for him. This simple shift in process decoupled his survival from his fuel supply. He wasn't just getting cleaner water, he was getting it for free, saving his precious cut wood for the essential task of heating his shelter. He had, without the language of modern science, invented a passive, gravity-fed water purification system. He had turned the greatest threat of his environment, the lethal, relentless cold, into his greatest ally. The freeze was no longer the problem, it was the engine of the solution. Jedediah Stone lived in that cabin for 2 more decades. He watched the valley change, watched the trappers fade and the ranchers and settlers arrive. He saw his ice table design built, modified, and improved upon by newcomers. He lived a long life, and he was never, ever gut-sick again. He would often stand by the river in the deep cold, his hand resting on the worn, familiar handle of his ice chisel. He watched the river lock up, not with the dread of his first winter, but with a quiet, profound respect. He didn't see a barrier. He saw a machine. He saw a great, slow filter working tirelessly on his behalf. He had learned that survival was not, as he had once thought, a matter of force. It was not about a man's strength to swing an axe, to fight the elements. Survival was a matter of observation. It was the patience to watch, the humility to learn, and the intelligence to see the systems already in place. The common wisdom is often just common, not wise. It is built for the average, but the frontier, and life itself, is rarely average. It is a place of extremes. To thrive in those extremes, you cannot simply do what has always been done. You must question the assumptions. You must ask why it is failing. The solution is often hidden inside the problem itself. Jed's world was defined by a lethal cold, but that same cold offered the very key to his health. He learned that the universe provides its own solutions, but it demands you align yourself with its laws. You cannot force nature to bend to your will, but you can, if you are quiet and clever, harness its immense power to serve your own. The difference between desperation and security was not a stronger axe, but a different idea. It was the simple, revolutionary understanding that the ice was not the enemy. It was the answer.